Alright, let's see what this show's about. Fuck. Anime review. Kill la Kill is directed by the same team behind Gurren Lagann, and I kinda see the two as opposite sides of the same metaphorical coin. On the one hand, you have Gurren Lagann, which is about a young boy's journey to pierce through as many things as possible with his massive drill. And on the other hand, you have Kill la Kill, which is about a young woman's journey to get naked and scissor. Wait. We begin at Honnouji Academy, a school ran by the head of the student council, Saotsuke Kyurin. Every member of the student council has a special uniform called a Goku uniform, which gives them special heightened abilities, usually kind of based around what they are head of in the school. The uniforms range in strength from 1 star being the weakest, to 3 stars being reserved for the Elite Four, which are kind of Saotsuke's personal guard. Enter Ryuko Matoi Ryuko, a transfer student and rebel, which you can tell by the red streak in her hair. She's been school hopping and ass kicking in search of her father's killer. See, her father was a scientist who worked on the Goku uniforms back in the day, which of course leads her to Satsuke. Upon arriving, Ryuko is immediately befriended by Mako, a no-star student who lives with her family out in the slums. Things come to a head when Ryuko spots Satsuke and immediately challenges her to a fight in order to find out the truth about her father's demise. Satsuke, who can't be bothered with commoners, says fuck that, fuck you, and fuck your daddy, and sends a 2-star underling after her. But surprise, motherfucker! Ryuko has a half-scissor sword designed by her father to tear through Goku uniforms like a simile I can't come up with. Ryuko whips out that scissor blade and gets her ass kicked before fleeing. Ryuko eventually finds her way back to her father's lab, where he and she used to live back when he was alive, and through a spoiler falls through a trapdoor and finds his underground laboratory, in which she meets Senketsu. Who's Senketsu, you ask? Not who. What? What? Yeah. Senketsu is a sailor uniform designed by her father before he passed away to combat the Goku uniform. Kill la Kill is very much kind of a twisted version of the magical girl job. It's like what would happen if Quentin Tarantino directed Sailor Moon. Everything you expect to be there's there, but to the extreme, just exaggerated beyond reason. Which brings us to the animation. The style is exactly what you would expect from the guy behind Gurren Lagann and Fully Cooley. Hyper colorful, distorted proportions, and extreme explosions everywhere. Which personally, I love. But the animation itself can be a bit lacking. They often resort to chibi cheapness and animation loops, and I'm thinking that's probably because they didn't have the budget they were expecting to have. But with the sudden explosion in popularity and an OVA set to come out in September, I'm assuming they're probably going to fix all those problems. Next up is the audio, which could probably have a whole episode dedicated to itself, honestly. I dig the voice acting, both the sub and what we have so far of the dub, and the soundtrack's pretty good. Each opponent that Ryuko faces seems to have their own theme song, as does she. They're all pretty catchy and fast-paced, which goes really well with the overall theme of the show. And I'd like to go into each one specifically, but ain't nobody got time for that. So suffice to say, it's a really cool addition that I really appreciated hearing, and I think that the time and effort that they put into it was well worth. Next up are the characters and plot, which for me are the bread and butter of the entire show. Not so much the plot, which we'll get to in a minute, but definitely the characters. Each one has their own fleshed out backstory, which, considering that the show is 24 episodes long, is pretty impressive. They all have their own reasoning for their actions, and in one way or another are usually pretty relatable. The most exemplary case of this is, of course, Ryuko. And it's not just because she kicks ass. It's her reasoning behind her actions and her demeanor that make her a great lead. She's not like Sailor Moon or any other female in the genre. Honestly, she's probably more of a stereotypical male lead than anything, which I personally find interesting. Her actions, her attitude, and her motivation aren't defined by her gender, but who she is, which I have to respect. Now, that's not to say that there's no strong female leads in anime, because of course there are. But more often than not, I find them to be either heavily reliant on or influenced by a male counterpart. Ryuko's character doesn't suffer from that at all. She wants to find out who killed her father and make them pay. And that to me is a very genuine and very human emotion and reasoning. She doesn't play second fiddle to anyone, and because of that, I have a little bit more respect for her than most of your badass anime femme fatales. On to the secondary characters. You have Mako and her family who kind of act as comic relief and an anchor for Ryuko to hold on to, which is nice. You have Aikoro, the mysterious teacher who acts as what I like to call the Giles of the group, And you have Setsuki and the Elite Four, who act as the antagonists for Yuko throughout the series, but also have their own backstory and agenda, for the most part. There's a ton of other characters, but to mention them would probably go into spoiler territory, and this video's running a little long anyway, so we're moving on. Now, before we go on to the plot, I have to talk about the fan service. Mostly because reviewing this anime would be impossible without at least mentioning it. There's a lot of it. Ryuko's uniform, when activated, is pretty reminiscent of Witchblade. Not to mention that almost every character gets naked at one point or another. Generally speaking, this is a bad thing. I find it to be lazy, sexist, and cheap. But there are two things I will give Kill la Kill over most fanservice-based anime. The first is that the plot actually gives some reasoning for the nudity. It's a thinly veiled excuse to show some TNA, but it's more than a lot of shows give. The second is the even-handedness of it. It's not all girls all the time. Dudes get naked too! And while it's usually for comedic purposes, the fact that it's not gender specific makes it a little easier to digest. Yeah, there are some scenes I'd like to purge from my memory, but overall they do a decent job of treading a thin line and not making the fan service come off as too sexist. Personally, I would have nixed the fan service altogether, but in the context of the plot, it makes some sense. All in all, the show is entertaining. For the most part. Was it anything we haven't seen before? Not really. But it was entertaining, and the characters were interesting at least. So after giving my own personal rating to each individual segment and performing some math, Kill la Kill gets a score of 6.9 out of 10. If you're a fan of Gurren Lagann or Fully Cooley, you're probably gonna dig this too. But if you're bugged by fan service or a relatively weak plot, feel free to skip it. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, subscribe, comment, and check out the annotations below for my other reviews.